we need the creatives, we need the pastors to communicate outside of a service context to this generation.
Welcome to the Church Circle podcast, the podcast that celebrates church creatives. And I'm here with Jacob Salguero. This is episode 9, and I'm your host, Ruben Rohard. And we're just going to dive in because you guys may know Jacob. You may have seen his stuff before. He is the Gen Z man. So he is on Instagram. You may have seen his Dear Church, Dear Gen Z, Dear Church Creative, whatever it may be. He's posted some really cool stuff and has some really cool thoughts and some good stuff to share. But why don't we get started? How are you, Jacob?
Man, I'm excited for this podcast. I think it's 12 o'clock my time. I don't know what time it is your time. But
6 p.m.
I'm just super excited to be here. 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Wow. You're out here grinding, dude.
This is normal for
me.
I'm
excited to be here, and I'm excited to add value to the church, man. I love the church. I love the local church. I love creatives. And I'm excited to add value to it.
You can tell from what you post and how you go about kind of your conversations, communication, you can tell that you have a real passion for the church. And I think that's really important for this day and age, is that people are doing ministry out of a place of passion and servitude as opposed to just obligation. And I think that's infectious. There's a lot of people that have as we talked about before, there's a lot of people that have been inspired by what you're doing. And I think it's really cool. So I think one of the things that we do on this podcast is we kind of like to know the person behind the Instagram page or the ministry. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? What's your story?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into design and creativity kind of like most people in the church. I feel like if you've been in church long enough, you're going to end up either preaching, singing, or being a creative in some capacity. I feel like that's what it's been like for me. I didn't grow up in church my whole life, but I ended up church kind of in my teenage years. I got radically saved by God and fell in love with the local church. It became like a safe haven for me. It became a place where, I found home for the first time. So I think that has given me a love for my church. And I started doing design work when I was a youth pastor over 4 students in Dallas, Texas. And I just wanted the kids to have sick graphics. So I just started learning, on a little phone app, learning design. And little did I know that God was preparing me for what I'm doing now for like full time. So I started off as a pastor, started off as just a regular leader who just loved students, loved Jesus, who loved his church. And God in his wisdom kind of just crafted this creativity thing, unlocked this thing that was in me. And, I worked hard to learn all the, the Photoshop and all those things. But little did I know that God was going to use that to put me in nations now. So I think it's cool to see like just my love for the church, my love for Jesus, my love for the students has led me to a life that's only I can dream of. So a little bit about me.
That's cool. And you've just got back from a trip in Europe, your first trip to Europe. As an Englishman, you didn't come to England, so I'm kind of upset about that. But you did get to experience Europe. So how was that for you, stepping off the plane, coming from America, coming from Texas to little old Europe with all of its tiny, windy streets? How was that?
I would say it's interesting because I do think, especially the region I was in Spain, Barcelona, there's a lot of young people, a lot of arts there. So I think it was a lot more creative when it comes to advertisements, things like that in the city compared to where I live in Texas. So I think that was cool. I think the overall, because everything's very walkable, so you need great creative to catch attention of people. So for me, that's one thing that was sick about Europe. But the culture of Europe is totally different than Texas. And I think in a sense it's slower than America. And I think that's the good thing. I think it's slower. I think it's just a lot of time taking. At first I was getting mad at people because they're walking so slow on the street, because I'm originally from New York. So I'm like, you guys are walking way too slow. And then realizing as I continue on throughout, I was there for almost 3 months. I kind of realized this is actually a healthy pace. So I think a lot of Europeans do have a healthy pace of life. They may not making as much money or, hustling, making a big name, but the pace of life is really beautiful. And I think that's what I've taken the most of. And creatively, I feel like a lot of companies are outside the box compared to in America where we just copy each other. I think in their realm, it's very creative in the sense of advertisement looks, stuff like that. So it's interesting. I love it.
Cool thoughts. Just so you guys know, my wife is American, and it was a big adjustment when we first started dating because she's the one that's it was about efficiency and sped off and did everything. And I was the typical European, took my time. So that's a continual learning curve for us. So I can relate to that. And when I go to America, I think, wow, everyone drives 90 miles an hour, especially in California. And, everyone's pace of life is so fast. But I love that as well, because there's efficiency. People think about exactly what they're doing. They think about what they're doing on the weekends more. So there's advantages to each pace of life. But we talked about Mr. Gen Z. I don't know if that's what you want to be known by, but that's kind of how when I explained to my wife, who I was talking to today on the podcast, God. I said, "It's Mr. Gen Z," and she said, "Oh, okay, I know." So how did that come about? You talk about youth pastor, but you have for a youth pastor who started out with 4 kids or 4 students, you've come to understand Gen Z incredibly well and the next generation. So how did that come about?
Yeah, it helps that I am Gen Z. So I'm born in 1998. So I'm born right in the beginning age group of Gen Z. So all of my peers growing up were Gen Z. My friends were Gen Z. So I am Gen Z. So it's kind of like when people ask me, like, how do you know so much about Gen Z? Like, I'm just saying what I feel, right? Which I feel like a lot of my generation doesn't know how to communicate. I think Gen Z really struggles to communicate in general. They suck at texting back. They suck at calling back, stuff like that. So I think me having the ability to communicate how I feel and how I see has been able to give a lot of people a voice to communicate to their churches or whatever, right? It started when I was a youth pastor, and I feel like I had like a inclining about like, how can I love a generation I don't know? And I began to just study Gen Z through like secular statistics. Because I love church statistics. There's nothing wrong with them. But I think there's always a skewed way to get positive out of it. Like as the church, we don't want to make the church look bad, right? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think for me, I wanted an unbiased, like fresh perspective of the generation as a whole. And just seeing the stats kind of awaken like a heart in me to like really love this generation more, seeing how most of them aren't church, seeing that most of them didn't grow up in church, didn't grow up in religion, and a lot of them don't want to be religious. I think that's what my big thing about start talking about it online and kind of raising awareness around it. Now people just post it for clicks or whatever, but I was posting in the beginning because I was like, I want to make an awareness like that there's an issue, I took a lot of licks for it in the beginning. I think a lot of people were coming at me saying I hated the church, all these things. But my whole heart was, I love the church so much that I want my generation to be a part of it. And this is why I'm raising awareness on these issues. Now, a year and a half later, people understand. But I had to take a lot of licks. So now people are posting Gen Z stuff and it's okay, whatever. But when I first started posting it, like people were very upset and not and understanding what I was like, communicating. And I think it takes time to like in awareness so people can understand Gen Z. So my heart for Gen Z started was just like, I am one. And I think me being a pastor of 4 kids and getting that inclination of like, I really want to understand this generation and I really want to love them. So I have to know them. So I begin to learn stats and stuff like that. So
yeah, this is a conversation that Brady and I had in a previous episode. If you haven't listened to that, go and check that out. But we talk about a similar thing where with Gen Z, it's a very new kind of dimension to learn. And the people that should really be talking are the people that are experiencing Gen Z for themselves. So as millennials, as people that are posting, a lot of people that are listening right now are millennial. A lot of people that are in the church, particularly in the social media game, they are millennials who are maybe doing it for their church. And what happens is they post for what is right for them, but not necessarily think about the next generation. So I'm so glad we've got some Gen Z voices coming in now. I'm technically Gen Z. I know it doesn't look like it. I'm 1997, so I just made it through. My wife's a millennial, but we won't talk about that. She's going to kill me off this podcast. But yeah, so it's really cool that you're speaking up. And I think it's the same thing, in 10, 15 years ago when people started to push the church to get Facebook groups, YouTube channels, it was the same thing. There was a lot of pushback because church isn't one to change quickly. I think COVID made a very big increase in that happening. But
Right.
consistently the church is someone or something or an organization or an entity that takes a long time to move with the times. And part of that's for a reason, because the word of God doesn't change. You have to be true to what our beliefs are. But at the same time, the message doesn't change, but the method in which we communicate it does. So just glad we've got people like you kind of speaking up and maybe helping us who are nearly millennials kind of learning, or even older, learning something. So here's a big question for you, and this is probably a question that a lot of people ask when they try and kind of diminish Gen Z. Are Gen Z even interested in faith?
Yeah. Well, there's a stat on Gen Z being like one of the most spiritual generations, in the sense of their interest in spirituality in general has increased. There's like a popular social media guy who commented on my post one time. He's like, how come this stat is not in your book, right? Because I wrote the book before the stat came out, right? And the stat just came out recently through Barna about, I don't know the number, I don't want to say it, but it's a higher, I think it's above 70% are interested in spirituality. And what I begin to notice, and one thing I feel like a lot of Christian leaders need to understand, and even creatives, is like you need to look in the world around you and like pay more attention to the world around you. Some people say touch grass, right? Like you need to touch grass, like realize that like there's a world around you. And I began to open my eyes into places where Gen Z was at, Urban Outfitters, all the kind of shopping places. And I started noticing more tarot cards, more, astrology, more crystals, more signs. And I began to notice, like, man, it is true that Gen Z is looking for more spirituality. They're understanding that there's something bigger. Like, my generation was hyped about the aliens, like, that we found aliens. Or, that's the big thing in the U.S. Like, the Congress is like, yeah, we have proof that aliens exist. Like, my generation on TikTok loved that. There was a big conspiracy theory about, there was aliens in the Miami Mall. And Gen Z was all over that. And I think there's something interesting that my generation, because a majority didn't grow up religious, there's nothing to attribute their hunger for spirituality to. And I think for me, it's like there is a hunger for spirituality, and here's the cost, because you're a spiritual being, you're made in the image of God, and Jesus is the cure to that hunger in your soul for spirit. But that's kind of the disconnect we're at right now at the church, is that the church hasn't really like addressed that hunger spiritually for Gen Z, and we're still just trying to get them into the church. You know what I mean? So there's that big disconnect where I'm trying to bridge that gap too, and communicate the way we get the hunger for spirituality, Gen Z, into the church is not trying to get them in, but us being them outside, right? Like us being the church outside, us using creativity through social media, through graphics, through video, to speak their language, to kind of cure that appetite for spirituality that they already have, right? So I think that's kind of the thing. I don't think there's like a religious thing. I think there's just a hunger of spirituality. And Billy Graham has a dope quote that says, like, as the world gets darker, people begin to want more light. And I think that's what's happening with Gen Z. There's like suicide being like the number 2 cause of death for this generation, addiction on the rise. People are like, the world getting darker and darker. So you can tell that there's a sense for some kind of light that from this generation. And we know it's Jesus, we know it's the church, but we need the creatives, we need the pastors to communicate outside of a service context to this generation. So that's been my battle, been my communication for the last like year. And why I get a lot of pushback is because that's not the traditional method that we've seen in the last 40 years. And that's because in the last 40 years, church, especially in the West, has become normal. And suddenly two generations are like, peace out, church. And now we're here, so.
Yeah, I think COVID has a big part to play in that as well, because a lot of the formative years for this age group were spent kind of without church being something they could go to. So that, like, their students group, their high school group, whatever it was, they couldn't even go and attend. And so it just became an online thing. And I think the pursuit of the modern church, or the evangelical church, at least in the last 15 years, has been very seeker and very much based on entertainment, not from a place of ego or from a place of anything malicious or malign. But I think what it is that they knew that they could get people through the doors, and if they could get people through the doors with entertainment, they could introduce the gospel to them. But now, for our whole age group and younger, entertainment is so accessible. If you think about what's come along in the last 5 years, streaming wise, you can watch whatever you want. You can be entertained however you want in the comfort of your own home. And COVID just accelerated that. So it feels like the church is now having to move away from entertainment and going back to its roots of, okay, this is a gospel message, this is the truth. And, whether it's whether it's offensive or not, or whether it's something that's uncomfortable, it's not for your entertainment, it's for your eternity, right? So
wow,
it's very interesting, I think, as well. And you might have some good thoughts on this conversation. Do you think that Gen Z, because we all want a savior, but rarely do we want lordship, right? Like Jesus is savior and Lord, and we rarely want Jesus to be the Lord of our lives, because that tends to be where people think about religion. They think about the rules, they think about the boundaries you have to put in place. Do you think Gen Z are any less open or kind of more hesitant for lordship, or is it just a case of we just don't understand them and maybe we're not reaching them properly?
Well, I mean, every human being will have an issue with lordship, right? We know that. But it was easier in a generation like the boomers, or I think after that's Y. But I may be wrong. X, I don't know. Whatever the generation before that. I don't study those. But it was easier, and it was easier in those generations because in that time it was all about, especially in the West, I don't know about Europe, but in the West for sure, it was all about, get an education and get a good job and stay at that job until you die. Because we just come off the Great Depression and it's like, we don't know when this is going to happen again. I just need stability. Now we live in a generation where it's like, oh, you don't want to hire me? Well, I'm going to build my own company and beat you. Right? Like that's it. And I won't lie, I've had that energy before, because I've had places where like places that wouldn't hire me, churches that wouldn't hire me. And now they're hiring my company, not even knowing it's me. Right? So it's like crazy. But I think it's like our generation has this mentality of like, if you don't want me, I'll beat you. And I think that's a very toxic thing when it comes to Christianity and lordship, because like having you submit your whole life to Jesus and not having a say on what that looks like and submitting everything to him is going to be troubling for our generation, because I can find success without Jesus. I can get my affirmation, my likes, my money, my everything without Jesus. And why do I need Jesus in a Western context, right? But there goes to a time where I feel like we're coming to a day and an age where all of this stuff is going to be harder to attain, and we're going to be all desperately dark on the inside. And I feel like Gen Z is running to that point where it's like, you're not going to get the affirmation online. You're not going to be able to make that money so easily. Like there's going to come a time where that's going to change, and you're going to see in your soul how much you need Jesus. So I think older generations, it was easier because we were taught, submit to your job, stay there for 30 years, be loyal. My generation, I don't know if you watch NBA, but even in basketball, in my generation, that's when people started changing teams, right? In the older generation, Michael Jordan stayed in your team for years, right? One team, Kobe Bryant, one team forever. My generation, I started watching LeBron. What is he known for? The decision, changing teams, going to a better situation, right? And I think my generation is the same way. We're like, oh, we're just going to keep moving until we get to a better situation. And you've seen that all over in employment. You see that in college. You see that in college football players leaving one college to another because it's a better opportunity. It's that idea of like the grass is greener on the other side. But really the grass is greener where the sun hits it and where it's watered, right? And I think for us, it's like, like if we submit to the sun and we tend to what's in front of us, that's going to be more fulfilling than jumping to the next thing, right? So
sure. No, that's really good. No, really good. So so the church, we're talking a lot about Gen Z, how the church can reach Gen Z and how as creatives, and we might dive into that a little bit more in a second, but how does Gen Z impact the church? So let's say Gen Z are now in the church, part of high school ministry, whatever that may be. What's the impact of having Gen Z in the church?
Yeah, it starts with like, if there's no youth in your church, it's going to slowly die. We've seen that with churches failing where the congregation gets older and older and there's no one else to take the place, right? There comes a time where your congregation gets too old where they can't serve anymore and they can't be deacons, they can't be elders. This whole Christianity thing is built on generational, like passing down by generations. Like this is how Christianity is built. So if we don't focus on the next generation and build them up to be leaders in the church and they're outside, it's going to be a harder work later where we're just trying to, I said this before, I said, instead of trying to, bring back Gen Z to the church, what if we steward them right now, right? That's the thing. Like, instead of just letting them leave, doing their thing, and then walking away from Christianity, and then we have to go out there and get them again, why don't we just steward them when they're in front of us, right? So I think that's a big issue, is that in the church, even statistically, pastors are getting older and older, congregations are getting older and older, less and less young people. Who's next? I'm Gen Z and I have a kid, okay? Like, I have a child. I make and I make a lot of income where I can give to church, right? Like, I can give a lot to the church. And like, that's a lot of Gen Z's life. Like, now we're parents, we make a lot of money. So even financially, you should love Gen Z, because financially, they're going to be the next tithers. They're going to be the next givers, right? Like, my kids, they're going to be I need to raise them in church. Like, they're going to be the next generation after me. We're the next leaders, deacons, pastors, elders in the church. Like, I think that's been the thing we don't think about, because I think churches see that they're okay right now. But as they get older, they're going to start noticing, man, where's the life at? Where's the young people at? So my whole thing is, why is Gen Z important right now? Is because if we can keep them in the church right now and we can steward them right now, we don't have to do what we did with millennials. This is what we did with millennials. We let millennials leave the church, so then we try to make the church super relevant so they can come back in. And now the church is so overly relevant that it's not real anymore. So now Gen Z is like, I see, why is this pastor wearing skinny jeans? They're looking like, what are you doing? Like, they see it, and so we had to overcorrect to try to get millennials back into the church. And now we see the same cycle happening again with Gen Z. So that's what my whole thing is. Why is Gen Z important in the church? One is because they're next, and they're already making money and having kids. So they're the young families that you will want in the church. Most churches, especially in the West, the bigger churches are built on young families. We are the new young families, right? Millennials have kids, and now Gen Z, we're the young families. So instead of like trying to wait later and try to get them back, steward them right now.
Church Media Squad is here to help you innovate your media and stay relevant for every generation ahead. We're constantly creating new ways to engage every heart and mind with our designs, websites, and more. We want to give every church the best opportunity to make an impact on their community. Click the link in the description to learn more about the squad. Now, back to the episode. That's great. That's great advice. And I think, this has been a bit of a wake-up call, especially for, in the last 3 years or 4 years now, when people came out of habit to church, and then when something global called COVID broke those habits, a lot of people just didn't come back. And so now, it really is about, like, it would be the family, like you said, the young family or the kind of middle-aged family that would bring their kids, who might be Gen Z. They would bring them out of a place of habit, and they would take them to whatever the program was on a Friday night out of habit. And now a lot of people are falling away from that. So it is about stewarding, because habit comes from doing what from kind of things that you remember to do, or things that, fit your routine. But when there's actual kind of like conviction, and you're like, I need to go to church because it's better for my soul, that's when people make it a priority. So, and that can only come from personal conviction, right? Like, if you base your faith as a Gen Z on your parents' faith, the moment they fall off the wagon, which may not happen, but it may happen, the moment that happens, your faith goes with it. So I think stewardship is a great thought. Like, how can we give each Gen Z, each young person, their own personal conviction to follow Jesus their own way, right? Like, in their own heart, not just kind of through the familiar habits. No, it's really good, man.
My question would be like,
yeah, go ahead.
My question would be like, why? Like, why did it drop off so bad during COVID? And I think it was because, like, if church is merely 4 songs and a sermon, I can just watch it Elevation on YouTube. Like, if that's what church is, and I think that's what a lot of young people come to, like, well, and the thing is, the majority of church in America in the West is like small church. Like, the largest percentage of church in America is a small church. So the big churches, they're great with young people. They have, like, I've seen like mega churches, they always have a lot of young people. It's great, right? They're set up, right? A lot of them are set up because they have more resources, whatever, right? I don't know how that works, but they're like in the 1% of the church of the United States. The majority of the church is under 100 people. And the majority of the congregations are not young. They're not young. And so I think and people always say, oh, well, you look at this church, they're doing it. Bro, I'm talking about the average church in America, the little 100-member church. Go into there on a Sunday morning and tell me how many young people you see. And I think that's where we came to the issue, because these young people that were there with their parents that were forced to go in 2020, it shut down. And their live stream, whack, right? Like, they don't have the money for it, right? They don't have money for anything to do dope service. They could have just pulled their iPhone out and did a Bible study, or be more intentional with texting people. But they try to do a service. They focus so much on the Sunday morning service, where Gen Z's like, if that's all it is, bro, I could just watch it on YouTube. And we saw that in the rise of a lot of pastors who are famous now. Because of 2020, they had a live stream, they killed it on live stream, and a lot of young people are watching them. So I think that's, for me, the question would be like, why do we have church? Is it just for 4 songs and a sermon? If that's the case, Gen Z is not going to pull up, because they're going to have the best, But if church is about community, about pastoral leadership, is it about building my faith, and it's bigger than just a Sunday? And that's when Gen Z is going to be like, yo, okay, there's people who love me. They're texting me. They're calling me. We have relationship. Yes, I'll show up because I have relationship there, right? So I think that's where the disconnect happened. Where like, I don't even know my pastor. Like, why should I watch his live stream? He doesn't even know my name, right? And it's like these small 100-member churches, this is what the future of the church is really distinguished on. Elevation is cool. Like all the Bethel, they're awesome. They're going to stay here for a long time, but they're literally 1% of the Church of America. It's these little 100-member churches with like all around the world, all around the nation, who the future of the church is held on. So I think that's where it's kind of like, I've been having my battle. I'm not calling out mega churches. I love them. I'm focused on the 100-member churches.
Sure.
That's where we need to put our energy on,
That's great. That's really good. So the chances are, if we talk about those percentages, the most of the people that are listening here are part of a church that maybe is smaller than 150 people. So the question is, they may be thinking, okay, how do I reach this Gen Z? Maybe they're at the point where they've had, Gen Z leave their church, and they get, like you said, we're kind of having to go back to bringing them in. So what are some strategies and some tools to do that?
Yeah, for me, it would be equipping the saints practically on reaching Gen Z where they're at. So I feel like the most Gen Z you're going to see right now are the older ones or even young ones in your workplace. What we need is pastors to equip the saints to go and be intentional with younger generations in their workplace, in their jobs, in their schools, right? That's the first thing. Beyond like me getting you to church, I need the church to get out there. And that's been my rally cry for the last 6 months, where it's like, if you're not Michael Todd, you're not Jacob Salguero, you're not Ruben, like you don't have a big platform, but you are talking to Gen Z every day. We need you to go talk to people about Jesus and be that light in your workplace and bring them into the place, right? I think that's a huge thing, right? Wherever they are. I think the second thing is being really intentional with a digital space. You don't need to have cool graphics like Ruben, like his graphics are crazy. You just need simple graphics and really good intentionality, where like you're talking to people that are like in your church, and you're not here doing it for the 50,000 likes. You're here doing it to reach and connect with the people in your church, the Gen Zs that are in your church. And I think my big thing is like really it's the non-scalable stuff. It's the discipleship. It's the coffee shop meetings, and it's the leaders. It's just leaders in your church. Even if you have a 100-member church, it's just the ones who are leaders in your church going out of their way and communicating to young people that they're valued in this building and that they're loved and they're getting poured into. Because what I've noticed this generation, they will go all in on people who give value to them. That's what YouTube is. YouTube is literally just a value machine where like they will subscribe, pay for freaking mentorship things. They'll pay for courses just because it's adding value to them. And I think for us as a church, it's like, if we started adding value to the young people in our church, instead of just like talking down on them or like, you're not Christian enough or you're not serving enough, if we added value, instilled value, teaching, growing them in relationship, they will go all in for our church. But for some reason, with millennials, we did this too. We rather see their head than their heart. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
We rather see their head in a crowd rather their heart and their voice and who they are in a conversation. And I think we have to go back to the non-scalable things and being in relationship and hearing people and listening to people, even if you're not the pastor, but you're just a leader, a person who loves young people. Like, that has to be your heart cry, and adding value to young people and see them be bought into the church.
Yeah, I think that's why the role of a youth pastor or a young adults pastor, it's so important, especially that young adult range, that 18 to 25 plus, because those such formative years. But at the same time, it's not an easy thing, right? Like, we talk about, what are some of the things that transform church online, and you can come up with a few easy things to do that. But when it, like you said, it's non-scalable stuff. It's not easy stuff that you can kind of delegate. It's stuff that takes personal responsibility. It's like, I'm going to spend an hour of my time with one person, because the one person is important more than the 100, 200, 3 people I might reach on social. Now, if you're looking at it holistically, all of those things work together great. You want to be able to reach people on social and be able to reach people in person. But it basically sounds like, and I'm sorry for those who are listening thinking I needed an easy fix, it sounds like a lot of this comes down to, you've just got to, work hard and reach people and focus on those people that are in your church. Focus on those people that you do have a reach to personally, in person, and just generate a real community of people that know they're loved and they're seen and they can be trusted with things in the church. And yeah, you're so right. I've personally seen that, where young people are, like, our youth pastor at our church is 21. He stepped into that role maybe 2 years ago. And, from the outside perspective, that could be, whoa, that's crazy. That's a really young age to take on some pastoral responsibility. But when you're building a community and you're building friendships and you're building, you're stewarding that's going to last a lifetime, you really have to be in with them. You can't just be, this 40-year-old guy, and, unless you have the tools that you're talking about, having that personal relationship and valuing Gen Z. So these are really good thoughts, Jacob. And we're kind of running out of time, so maybe we've got time for one more question. Do you have any kind of final thoughts? There's obviously so much that we've just discussed, but I guess maybe there's some alternative things to what I've just said that you may have to say. So feel free to share some final thoughts.
Yeah. There's a verse in the Bible that says, some sow, some water, but it's God who gives the increase. And the whole idea of that, I feel like, especially in this context today, is I see social media as sowing seed, especially for church. You're just sowing seed. You should be just investing, doing verses, just sowing seed. And then watering is that intentional discipleship, that one-on-one. You can't have seed without water, And through us consistently putting seed out there, making the graphics, doing the digital stuff, being really intentional with that and being excellent in that, right? With us being excellent with our, one-on-one discipleship and our investment, these two things, God will see, oh, I honor that and I'm going to grow that. And I think that's where we need to let's be okay with the watering, with the sowing and the watering, and just let God do the rest. Our issue as a church is we're so worried about the increase that we stop doing the sowing and the watering. And we're just okay, what's the number? It's the small groups. What's the number on attendance? What's the number on membership and salvation? So we can post a dope end of year graphic about how many people came to our church and how many people got saved, right? That's not the goal. Sowing and watering is our responsibility, and increase is God's responsibility. So for us, especially with Gen Z, we just got to continue sowing seed, sending those texts, making the content, picking up the phone, doing a FaceTime call, doing conversations and Sunday morning service, doing the little things and investing our time and our energy on growing in people, young people, and we'll trust God to do the rest. Because if more of us decided to take, I'm not a pastor at a church right now. I'm a graphic designer, okay? I'm just a regular graphic designer. And I think for me, God really put me in this position, and I could do a whole podcast about how I'm in this position. But the fact that I'm just a regular schmegular person who pays taxes and goes to the grocery store and cooks his own meals. You know what I mean? I'm a regular person that just loves my generation. I think there's a lot more people who are like me, who they love their generation. They may never get followers and likes for it, but we need you to keep showing up. We need you to keep sowing seed. We need you to keep watering, keep giving your all, because God's going to make an increase in our generation of those who get saved. And it's just going to take regular schmegulars like me, not Gen Z experts or people, just regular people that God's going to say, all right, I burden you for young people. Do it regardless. without the likes, without anything. Just do it and watch how God increases, bro.
That's great. So if you are in ministry, especially with young people, we just want to say thank you for what you're doing, and keep going. Hopefully that's encouraged you.
Yes.
Jacob, incredible thoughts, and hopefully that's encouraged you guys to keep going. Maybe that was a little extra shot in the arm you guys needed for 2024. So now we really super appreciate having you on the show. And if you guys liked what Jacob had to say, Jacob, where can people find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Jacob Salguero, Salguero. TikTok's the same thing. That's where you can find me. That's it. That's all I do. And if you live in Dallas, you can find me in the street.
There you go. There you go. I need to book a trip to Dallas at some point. You've been to Europe. No, it's my turn to...
I'll show you around, bro.
There you go. All right, let's make it happen.
You have a good time in Dallas. You'll have a good time in Dallas. Come on, man. You got to pull up.
Yeah, we'll do. Okay, guys, if you have enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a rating, whether that's on Apple Music, Spotify, or just like and subscribe on YouTube. This is where this video podcast will be. And we'll be back again for our final episode of season 1. How did that happen already? Really exciting guest for next week. I won't say any more because we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks, guys.